My friend and I had been talking for a while about doing DMT. He'd previously dosed at least once, with a mimosa extraction combined with blue lotus. He tried to tell me about it, but after doing it, I can say that his best attempts were akin to trying to describe the most incredible flavor you've ever tasted. You can't compare it to something else, but as far as communicating the essence of it, there's nothing but experience that comes close. Anyhow, he came to my house with 50 micrograms that'd be extracted by a friend from Mimosa tenuiflora. It was slightly brown in appearance, though crystalline as well. From what I'd read, it still had a bit of plant alkaloids and oils in it, but that was okay. He loaded up a glass pipe with a thumbhole shotgun on the side by first putting down a layer of lotus, sprinkling on the DMT, and then topping it off with more of the lotus. We sat on facing couches, my wife snuggled up against my shoulder, and I lit the pipe with a lighter. "Let it vaporize," my friend told me. So I did. I held the flame until smoke began to form in the pipe and I drew heavily. I immediately tasted plastic and something else. It wasn't entirely unpleasant, but it wasn't exactly smooth. With the first draw, I began to see small sparkles appear in the room. "Breathe out," my friend told me. So I did. "Now take another hit," I did. The taste wasn't so bad the second time, but things began to waver at the edges. It's the only way to describe it. Reality started to fade away. I remembered reading a report that said that it's important to get to the third hit in order to break through. So I did. I exhaled the smoke and inhaled the final hit. All of a sudden, things began vibrating. I heard a thrum in the air. I looked over at my friend, and the only way I can describe what I saw was that it was like one of those video ripple dissolves. Waves danced through the air centered on him, and his essence rippled along with those waves. My wife held on to me and I began to feel her presence less and less. I've read reports before, talking about closing one's eyes or keeping one's eyes open. I had no choice. My eyes closed without my conscious thought, and when they closed, things exploded. But not in a scary way. I saw bright geometric lines flowing all around me. The lines seemed to include symbols, but they weren't symbols I recognized, and it didn't matter. Space opened up all around me, and I felt that I had completely left my body. Again, not in a scary way, but I knew I was somewhere else. The lines kept running down the light lines in front of me in a very rectangular geometric pattern. I stared with my eyes closed in amazement and just let it flow over me. Eventually, the lines began to coalesce into a shape, and as time went on, the lines began to contract into the shape of a woman's head. To me, it looked like the Madonna. Serene, peaceful, non-threatening. Not that it looked like a Madonna I'd seen before, but the curvy shape of a woman wearing a shawl was very clear. Her face formed out of the lines, not like a real face. She smiled at me, and she swept out of the way to the left, welcoming me in. I flew in, with no sense of my body. All around me was light, pulsing, moving, defining geometric structures in a way that seemed very mechanical, but not cold. It was a vast expanse of moving light made of more colors than I can remember. In some ways, calling it light does it an injustice, as if it was neon or some other mundane artifact. It wasn't. It was light moving against light, with planes stretching out into infinity, though without making me feel lost and small against it. Interestingly, however, I did feel small. Not small as in a small scared rabbit staring into the face of a vastness I couldn't comprehend, but small as if I'd shrunk down to the point of being able to see even beyond the micro level. I felt that I was behind the scenes, behind reality, but not outside of it. I felt like I was seeing things as they really were, if we could only open ourselves up to see beyond what our senses told us. I flew further, completely unaware of my body. This is the only point at which I ever got scared. All of a sudden, I realized that I couldn't feel or hear the subtle rhythms or sounds that I hear all the time that tell me that my body is working, that my heart is pumping, and my lungs are breathing in air. This kind of freaked me out. I have slightly elevated blood pressure, and the cardiac effects of DMT worried me. I placed my hand on my chest and felt nothing. Until my wife squeezed my hand, then I knew I was going to be all right. I then was able to open myself up to the experience. I had been floating in this immense space of light, but it wasn't that bright white light of NDEs, but rather a busy, flowing, information-rich space that seemed to be holding everything in the universe together, busily transmitting the information that made it all happen. I began to fly forward in this space, and soon I was amazed. I was entering the waiting room that so many reports have talked about. But this waiting room wasn't static. It was a room that was perfectly square, bounded by walls of light and flowing information. I began to fly towards it, with no apprehension at all. After all, this was a common touch point I could relate to from what I'd read. But as I grew closer, the room became more amazing than I'd anticipated. Its walls began to unfold outward, not in 3 dimensions, but in 4, maybe more. I was inside a tesseract, or maybe something with more dimensions. It wasn't scary. On the one hand, it was a room with information flowing everywhere in glowing bright symbols, much like, I hate to admit it, the Matrix. On the other hand, the walls were unfolding before me into new dimensions, and I suddenly understood, at least for that moment, that everything exists in so many more dimensions than we could possibly imagine or even begin to picture in our 3D reality. It was again amazing, incomprehensible, illuminating, but also comforting. I entered the room, looked around, and decided to leave. That was okay, there was nothing for me there to look at, and it just seemed like another stop on the journey. I don't remember much of the transition, but finally I arrived at the penultimate vision of my journey. I was in a space, hanging in place, perfectly calm, and looking out at what appeared to be 2 glowing, information-rich, counter-rotating cones. I was in the middle of them, but I was also off to the side. I could see all of it, but felt like I was part of it. Both extended upwards and downwards, as far as I could see, and I was in the middle of them. They rotated around me, geometric yet organic, glowing and, I guess there's no other way to describe it, happy. There was nothing scary about it. I was seeing the gears of the universe turning, and everything was okay. I hung there for a while as if I was weightless, and then something told me that it was time to return. I drew back in my vision, the cones receded, and I opened my eyes. Honestly, opening my eyes was the most profound moment of the experience. I looked across at the other couch to see my friend, and I found that I could shift my vision between seeing reality and seeing the other side that lay just beyond that reality. I looked at my wife, smiling at me on my shoulder. I saw her face turn to crystal, and stars exploding in her eyes, and then I could shift my vision back to see just them. This effect went on for what felt like minutes, though I understand from them that it was just seconds. The most amazing thing is that when I chose to blend the DMT hyperspace and reality, I saw my friend's head, surrounded by what can only be described as a crystalline headdress. I know this sounds stupid and cliched, but he had the headdress and the aura of a shaman. He was my guide, he was the one that brought me here, everything was okay. Stars exploded in my wife's eyes as she kissed me lightly on the lips. The final revelation of the trip was when they saw me coming out of wherever I had been and spoke to me. My friend's voice came to me not as his voice, but as my own. In the same tone and pitch that I hear when I hear myself speak. His words were his own, but at that point his words were not spoken out loud, though I know they were, but inside my head like telepathy. My wife spoke to me, and her voice filled my world, and helped me gently land back in my body and on the couch. Amazingly, they told me later that only about 5 minutes had passed. They said that I was serene the entire time, though I started laughing at the end, something I remember because my dog started barking as I left hyperspace, and the dog's bark formed a hilarious bass line to the song in my head. I came back, Had a few moments of disorientation, again, not unpleasant, just an adjustment, and I was fine. Total trip, maybe 7 minutes, and when it was over, it was over. I didn't feel hungover, didn't feel that wrung-out feeling I get from LSD or cocaine, didn't feel any lingering anxiety. We talked about the whole experience for a few minutes. I tried to describe it, and my friend said to me one of the most important parts of the whole experience. It's like a dream. If you don't talk about it, you'll lose it. It'll go away. He was right. We spoke some more. I tried to assimilate the experience and realized that what I believed that I saw was the quantum foam, the underworkings of everything, the gears that turn our reality and make it happen. This wasn't a scary notion. In fact, it was somewhat matter of fact. But I couldn't help but marvel that I was able to get a glimpse beyond what we all perceive as reality, so I could see what possibly were the great workings beyond that reality. Maybe they were, maybe it was just a drug. But either way, having the ability to consciously switch in between reality and what lies beyond, that's what's going to stay with me forever. Thank you for listening.